gentlemen, welcome to America's Auto Enthusiast Program. This is Auto World. And now, here's your host, Bob Long.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for another hour of Auto World. And you're in luck because one of our regular contributors, our doctor of oil, is going to be joining us. He is just a remarkable gentleman with incredible knowledge, more than 25-plus years of experience in lubrication technologies, and he, of course, is one of the largest AMSOIL distributors both in the U.S. and Canada. We invite your calls at 855-660-4261. Don't be a stranger. Don't worry about it. Just if you have a question, don't hesitate. Give us a call at 855-660-4261. And, of course, the email available anytime for you guys, bob@autoworldradio.com. Right now, let's go to our oil guru. Here he is, the man himself, Dan Watson. Dan, thank you for joining us.
Well, it's great to be with you, Bob. We had a little bit of an interlude through the holidays, getting back to the regular routine here and back answering questions for the folks and talking about oil.
Absolutely. Why don't we start with a very basic question, but something that people still struggle with today. What is synthetic and how it is superior to petroleum oil?
Well, it's always a good question to go back over the basics because they never go away. If you understand the basics, everything else just piles on top, so to speak, but the basics never change. It's kind of like learning how to count. You can do a lot of advanced math, but, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right on up still remains the same. So it all builds on those cardinal numbers. So when it comes to oil and lubrication, it's something that should be understood, is that this technology never sits still. We've been improving and working on lubrication quality since the first guys in the Egyptian chariots were putting fat and lard on the axle wheels so that they wouldn't rub so hard that they would catch the wooden axle on fire. So they've been doing this lubricating stuff for a long time. It's just we figure out a little more as we go along, and we get smarter. And those old methods of lubricating with fat and lard, and then, of course, whale oil in a lot of applications, that was a lot of stuff we had to put up with. But as the need, or let's say the application of lubrication became more and more critical, can you imagine trying to lubricate your jet aircraft with 300 people inside the plane with lard? I think we would be scared to death to get in the thing because any moment the jet engine might catch on fire or blow apart because we're trying to lubricate it with lard. So as we develop these marvelous mechanical machines that we have over the ages, we have to keep that technology moving forward so that we can keep them working, protect them, lubricate them like they're supposed to be. And one of the little short story on that is that during World War II, the Germans, of course, were developing a very high-performance jet engine, and the United States and the British, Rolls-Royce was developing a jet engine, and General Electric and a couple of other people were developing the same kind of jet engine in the United States. Well, the Germans had, in a sense, perfected the jet engine and its true operation before either the United States or Great Britain, but their problem is that they had no source of titanium, so they couldn't make titanium turbine blades. So after about 10 hours of operation, the blades would become unstable and start flying through the sides of the engine. So the limit on their jet engine operation was maybe 10 hours due to that the steel blades couldn't take the constant temperature in that combustion turbine. But they had something that nobody was using in the United States or in Great Britain, which was they had a version of synthetic oil. It was an ester-based synthetic oil that they ran, and that oil could take the incredible high temperatures, 400 degrees or so, that it was subjected to in that jet engine. So after the war, the superior Rolls-Royce and American jet engines with titanium turbine blades that could take the heat and continue to operate, they now had a source of oil, because the trouble in the U.S. and Great Britain was we couldn't get more than 6 hours or so out of an engine, because the oil would fry and the engine would seize up, because we didn't have an oil we were making that could lubricate it, but we had blades that would stay together. So after the war, you get the superior blade technology married up with the superior synthetic oil, and, you know, that's the beginning of the aviation industry and the century of jet aircraft and engines that we have today, and that's what brought it together. So lubrication has been, in that instance, it was the hurdle that you couldn't get by. You just couldn't figure out how to keep this thing operating. Same thing goes for Arctic operations. Without synthetic oil, you wouldn't see those big Arctic crawlers going across the snow looking so cute and like they do and running across there, because you couldn't, if that engine ever turned off, the oil would freeze into bricks in it. You'd never start it back up. So synthetic oil makes that possible. So going into space where the temperature can be 175 degrees below zero in space, and there's no way, even the best synthetics barely can work in that environment, much less any kind of petroleum, which would be nothing but a block of frozen hydrocarbon ice, so to speak. So we have to move this oil technology along to keep up with our rapidly improving automotive technology. And that's what we're doing, Bob, is we're just trying to bring this along. When I talk about synthetic engine oil, sometimes people may think that we're talking about something newfangled. Well, this is not newfangled. This is stuff that has been coming along for a long time, and actually to keep up with the improving technology that comes out in the automobiles and motorcycles and boats and big trucks and ships and aircraft and all this stuff, the lubrication industry has had to get on its horse and keep up, not just keep up, but try to get ahead. So that brings us up to synthetic oil and how is it different than petroleum. And I know it's a little history lesson, but sometimes telling the story makes it make more sense to people than just giving statistics and facts. It's to let you know this is the natural order of things. We used to drive around on tires made from rubber that came from rubber trees in Malaysia and Indonesia. We don't get rubber from Malaysia and Indonesia anymore. Those trees are no longer cut for their sap production, because we make synthetic rubber, and that's what our tires are made out of today. And believe it or not, that's made out of oil and gas, not out of juice from the rubber trees or the rubber plants in the tropics. So I guess the rubber trees are happy about that. But on the other hand, you can get a tire to do something today. In other words, it'll go a long ways, and it's a superior tire to that old natural rubber tire. So we had to make that transition. And we have all of our big jet engines fly around for all of these aircraft. You don't remember. You're not as old as me, but most of those planes were all turboprops originally, and then they got changed to jets. Technology moved on. Well, it takes a different lubrication in a turboprop piston engine than it does in a combustion turbine jet engine. So we're just keeping up with the technology, and I know we're headed up on a break, so what I'll do is when we come through this break, when we come out on the other side, I'll hit the exact specifics of the synthetic oil, its features and benefits over petroleum. But that's a little of the history of getting here from there.
Sure.
So we'll move on after the break.
Great stuff. Our telephone number, 855-660-4261. One more time, 855-660-4261, or email me, Bob at Autoworld Radio, or email
Thank you for listening
Dan
to GCN.
at thelubepage.com.
Visit GCNlive.com today.
If you have any questions about lubrication, about synthetic oil, about the benefits of synthetic oil versus petroleum oil, and Dan, you did just a wonderful job. Dan, of course, got a web page, the lubepage.com. jcnlive.com, where you can email him up anytime. And as we both have said before here on the show, you can buy oil from anybody, but if you buy oil from the lube page, you get some advice from Dan Watson.
Well, I appreciate that promo for me. You know, one thing, Bob, we were talking about the oil before, is that people would say, well, okay, Dan, I've already crossed that bridge. I know that synthetic is better than petroleum. I got that under my belt. I believe that. Well, now the question comes up, are all synthetics the same? So that's the next phase we get into. So let's go back to a minute to what it really means to be synthetic and how that's different than petroleum. Well, to begin with, synthetic means that something man has altered it or man has made it from constituents into something. It is synthesized or synthetic. Plastic is a synthetic product. Fiberglass is a synthetic product, okay? If cotton is not a synthetic product, it is a natural product. So it came from nature. It was grown. Now, petroleum oil, there's arguments of where it comes from. You know, you hear the old thing, it's dead dinosaurs all turning into petroleum. There's some of that, I'm sure. But there has been a lot of advancement in where oil really comes from, and more than, I would say the greater preponderance of belief is that oil is actually coming from methane gas trapped in the earth, that as it comes up through the fissures in the earth, it reaches a certain temperature under a certain pressure, and it liquefies that methane into what we call petroleum. And they know this because they can do it in a laboratory. They can take methane gas and they can run it through certain temperatures and pressures, and it will end up making a black ooze of stuff that we would call petroleum. So more than likely, it's coming from methane that was trapped in the planet when the planet cooled and formed this earth that we have. And the methane was trapped down in the earth's surface or beneath the crust, and it keeps cracking and bringing up and forming pools of oil up in the crust. So we go after it. That's a natural product, part of the planet. And here's the problem. When we look at this, I'm going to make a synthetic oil. What do? Do our chemists get together and they decide, you know what, we want to make this stuff and we want every one of these hydrocarbon molecules to look the same. In other words, we want everything in this oil to look like millions of tiny, tiny golf balls. They're just all 100% the same. It's called uniform molecular structure. Boy, that's beautiful looking stuff. Then we go over to the petroleum side. Well, what did nature give us? Well, nature gave us whatever it formed, and different oil actually forms in different places. Pennsylvania crude is different than Texas crude, and that's different than the sweet benchmark crude from Saudi Arabia. These things are different. And then there's the North Sea oil, because the way and the pressure and their source and how they turn into oil is a little different in different parts. So in this petroleum oil, it's not like millions of little tiny golf balls. It's like some kind of fruit salad. I mean, you got anything in there, and it's really wild. If you could look at it on a molecular basis, you could have some things as big as peaches and some things as big as, grapefruit sitting side by side, and then you'd have a whole bunch of grapes in there, and then you'd have some plums and all different sizes. And what does that do? That means that without uniform molecular size, you don't have nice, easy, laminate flow within that structure. It's actually rubbing against each other and getting tangled up, so to speak. That's called friction. It's internal friction within the lubricant. So it can't support the weight. Imagine that you took 1,000 golf balls, put them on the floor, and laid a piece of half-inch plywood on top of them, and you jumped off of your stepladder onto that plywood. What would happen is that plywood would go shooting across the room, but none of those golf balls would have been burst. In other words, they would have uniformly held the weight that hit because they would have all been in contact with the plywood because they're all exactly the same size. Now, if you put that fruit salad on the floor and you put the plywood on top of it and you jumped on it, you'd burst the biggest pieces of fruit first until you got through them and you worked your way all the way down to where now there was enough different sized pieces of fruit trying to hold up the plywood. That's sort of the difference between petroleum and synthetic. True synthetic is a uniform molecular structure. Petroleum is a hodgepodge of whatever you can refine it to. Now, we're better, Bob, much better at refining petroleum than we've ever been in the past. So we're making better petroleum oil. We can get that down to maybe just plums, peaches, and, some kiwi fruit or something. Fairly close. They call it a cut of molecular size. Fairly close. But the problem is, even if you got it down to where it was all peaches, those peaches are not as strong as those 100 compression Titleist golf balls that you've got. So the synthetic oil it's like making golf balls compared to trying to use fruit and then comparing how much load either size can handle. It's just an easy analogy to look at. I can't break all those golf balls. They're too tough. They're man-made. But, boy, I can jump up and down on that board and smash all those pieces of fruit, and that's the petroleum stuff that's natural. So without even getting into chemistry, I'm telling you that analysis holds because good synthetic oil will have up to 4 times the film strength of petroleum oil, and it's based on uniform molecular structure. So now we kind of have an idea looking at the things, how they're different. We start to talk about, well, where does that make a difference in the actual application of this product? And we look at it and say, well, okay, we've already proven that it's just going to have a natural lubricating capability far significant more than the natural stuff. So it's going to separate those pieces of metal on its own with fluid, do a much better job keeping them separated under load because it's harder to push them golf balls out than it is to break those peaches. Now, we've established that, and the next thing comes, well, I have to worry about when I put oil in here. We got this wonderful atmosphere of ours full of oxygen, and it just loves to come in. As you know, it oxidizes the paint on your house. It is the thing that oxidizes actually on your skin. Anything that comes in contact with oxygen, if it reacts with the oxygen, it changes the structure of whatever oxygen will work on it, because that's what oxygen does. It's a very highly reactive element in the atmosphere. So I look at these two products and say, well, what about this golf ball stuff versus these peaches over here, right? And I know I'm going long-winded on this. We're coming up on the break, so let me finish up after the break. I promise to cut the fruit salad short.
I love your story, Dan, and so does everybody else. Stay tuned. More with Dan Watson, BluePage.com. Coming up right from that. This is Auto World.
Hi, this is Jay Leno, and you're listening to Auto World with Bob Long. You better watch out, man, how you drive that Cadillac there.
Here with and Dan Watson from BluePage.com. Love to hear from you guys. The telephone number, 855-660-4261. Are you worried about the oil that you're using in your vehicle? Are you thinking about switching to a synthetic? Do you have an old car, a performance car? Do you drive an old truck? Do you have a diesel-powered vehicle? We can handle all those questions and more. And Dan, I really like what you've been talking about in the last couple of segments. Once again, it shows, going back to World War II, the Germans continue to excel in engineering, and they were working on their version of the atomic bomb as well. And I just happened to see a story on Yahoo.com that evidently they have just now built a big warship, but there's some inherent problem with it that is not going to allow it to actually perform on the sea.
Oh, goodness. Well, that's your big mistake when you do that. You spend a few millions of dollars, sometimes $1 billion or more, building warships these days. So if you made a design flaw of that magnitude, somebody's looking for a place to hide.
That's right. I think it's probably a whole group of people are looking to hide.
Yeah, somewhere. Well, you know, Bob, on this final part about talking about these oils to get a picture in people's minds, We realize now that this man-made synthetic, that it's kind of like the difference between a monofilament fishing line and all cotton line, okay? And I'm not going into the analysis of fishing with those, but just to say that to give people one more idea of why we call something synthetic and something else as petroleum, as a natural product. But what does that mean actually where the rubber meets the road, so to speak? What does it matter in your engine with these two things? Well, we've established, based on uniform molecular size inside the oil, that it really will help keep those moving parts separated with a stronger film of oil than with the irregular shaped molecules in the petroleum. So we know now that I'm getting myself a better natural lubricant. It'll keep these moving metallic parts separated better with the fluid film that it has. So that's important. That's how we're going to prevent wear and lower the restriction to movement, and that allows us to have better fuel economy, longer-lasting engine. Now, the next part we get into on this is, I started talking about it, we have an atmosphere full of oxygen. And, folks, without getting into deep chemistry, just remember that oxygen is very reactive, and oxygen has a big -2 next to it in the world of polarity. It has a -2. Well, a lot of hydrocarbon products will have a positive, a natural +1 if they're not balanced. And so what happens is in these petroleum products, the manufacturers will put in a bunch of what they call oxygen stabilizing chemical to basically try to fill in with a harmless polarized product to fill in all these sites of polarity so that the oxygen doesn't come screaming in and fill them. Because when oxygen reacts with a hydrocarbon base like oil, it forms stuff that we call sludge and varnish. So the oil oxidizing is a big deal. And the manufacturers work hard to try to prevent that by adding different oxidation stabilizers to that oil to try to stop that reaction. And that's good. It works to a degree, but it can be burned up pretty fast under high temperatures. It disappears. Now, in the true synthetics, like the Amsoil product, they make all these millions of golf balls we mentioned, and all this uniform hydrocarbon molecular structure has no polarity. It's depolarized. It's neutral. And so there's no place for oxygen to react. So if we're talking about how long will your oil last, well, if it doesn't oxidize, it has the chance to last a long time, because the more oil that's oxidized, the more it disappears because it turns to varnish or sludge and it keeps going away. So having this natural depolarized stability in this oil means that we've defeated one of the biggest enemies of automotive oil out there, which is oxygen. And to do that means that we can have a very stable product for a long time, and that's why so many times I hear people talk about these engines that run on synthetic, they're spotless inside. They just don't have any varnish or sludge. It's because they don't make any. You have to make sludge to deposit it, and if you don't react with oxygen, you're not going to make much sludge. So that's why synthetic oils are so clean running in engines. I have seen them taken apart with 500,000 miles, and they are so spotless you can't believe it, and you can still see the machining hatch marks on the cylinder walls after 500,000 miles. So we're talking about something that really is manufactured to do its job. Good film strength, good oxidative stability. We have another problem with petroleum oil. It tends to have, because of its irregular molecular size, it easily vaporizes. And that means that the smaller grapes and peas and stuff that might be in that mix of fruit salads, it goes away when it gets hot. It just keeps popping out and going away. The lighter weight constituents boil out quickly, only leaving the large ones. So what does that mean? That means your oil gets too thick. Starts out as a nice 30 weight, and 3,000 or 4,000 miles later, it's already a 50 weight because it didn't lose all of its big molecules, but boy, it did boil off its light molecules. So all that's left is the big ones. You go over to the synthetic, hey, what little vaporization I have, I'm still left with all the same size molecules. So my my viscosity didn't change at all due to vaporization because they're all the same size. So I don't have a thickening based on boiling off oil. So, again, I like to go, wow, well, what does that mean to me? That means you don't use as much oil. Because oil consumption so many times is based on vaporization. Oil begins to get hot. It forms a vapor. The positive crankcase ventilation system opens. It sucks that vapor down into the vehicle and burns it, and it's gone. Well, that's consumption, oil consumption. It can be quite a bit. So this synthetic oil has low oil consumption, low volatility, low oil consumption. It's depolarized and neutral, so it doesn't react with oxygen. It has up to 4 times the natural film strength of the petroleum oil just because it's made with uniform molecular structure. I mean, you can already see this thing is just lining up to be just right down the line superior to the physical and chemical properties of the natural petroleum. And that's not surprising. It's why we're not driving around on natural rubber tires, because you can engineer something to be better than the natural product. I could give the example of that you build a lot of houses today, you know, the stick frame with the wood, but there's a lot of places replacing those with metal studs now. And the metal studs actually will never be subject to termites. They're stronger than the wood, and we don't have to cut down half the forest in order to make them. So different things move along, and that's what we're talking about here. Now, another part of the synthetic versus petroleum is what they call thermal stability, and this means how well will this oil respond to temperature? Because if I have operating oil in my engine, it's a 30-weight oil, and it's measured on the high end at 212 degrees. Well, what will be the viscosity of that oil at 300 degrees? Well, quite frankly, if it is a high-quality petroleum, it'll be about a 20-weight. It will have lost at least a grade going from 212 to 300, so it'll be down to a 20-weight. If it's a poor petroleum, it might be down to a 10-weight, okay? If it is a quality synthetic, like the ones you buy from Amsoil Synthetics, it'll still be in grade, be a 30-weight oil at 300 degrees. It'll be a 30-weight oil at 325, and most will make it to 350 before it starts to actually show some thinning to start coming down out of its rated viscosity. Now, at 350 degrees, a lot of petroleum has not got to worry about viscosity because we're trying to measure how much smoke it's making. It's blowing away if it's a lightweight oil. So this is why when we talk about these wonderful new turbocharged engines.
My pappy said, son, you're going to drive me to drinking if you don't stop driving that hot rod Lincoln.
Giving your radio a broadcasted tune-up. This is Auto World and your host, Bob Long.
Have you heard the story of the hot rod race when Fords and Lincolns were set in the base? That story is true. I'm here to say I was driving.
Amsoil when it comes to synthetic oil, when it comes to lubrication. And we'd love to hear from you at 855-660-4261 or shoot me an email, bob@autoworldradio.com or dan@theloopage.com. Dan has now given me access so I can see if folks are emailing Dan Watson at theloopage.com right now. Before that hard network break, you were making another great point. Dan, why don't you finish that one up?
Yes, I was getting on with the fact that if you look at these different aspects of what it is that we are concerned that can destroy, reduce the life of, or cause our lubricating oil to be inadequate, we start looking at things like oxidation, vaporization, thermal stability, how well will the oil resist changing with temperature. Then we get into what's the upper limit of this, what could this oil really stand? Well, you get into the Amsoil Signature Series synthetics, we're talking about going to 450 degrees intermittently without damaging the oil and without losing lubrication capability. So you're just not going there. If your oil's 450 degrees, it's because the car is burning up, okay? It's not going to get there, but you can be sure of one thing. You can't get the oil so hot that it won't lubricate, okay? It'll handle and it'll protect you. Now, the other thing is that's really crazy. You got this product that can handle 450 degrees, but it's also capable of pumping, letting your oil pump pump it at 60 degrees below zero.
Wow.
Yeah, so we need to look at the reality and understand and not play any games with people's understanding of these products. There is no person that is a chemical engineer, lubrication engineer, that understands lubrication that will not just flat out tell you that synthetic engine oil or synthetic lubricating oil of any kind will outperform any petroleum lubricant. Now, the only thing people say is, well, is there a place where it's cost effective, or would you be spending money that you don't have to spend to use it? And I would say to you that question had a lot more validity to it 25, 30 years ago. But today, all of these engines, there's so many now that are turbocharged. There's so many that are direct injected, they call them EcoBoost or direct injected engines. Now we have 4-cylinder engines pumping out 150 horsepower, 180, 200 horsepower with, 150, 200 foot-pounds of torque. Now, that's coming out of this little 4-cylinder. You got to ask yourself, how did they achieve that? Well, it's usually by fuel injection and turbocharge or blower boost or something. So we're pushing everything to give us more power and give us more fuel efficiency and pollute less. Those are great ambitions. Sometimes they fight against each other. So what happens is when we're trying to lubricate this thing, we're looking at saying, well, you want us to use an ever thinner oil. So we're using a lot of 0W20 and 5W20 in the marketplace. But at the same time, on your tailpipe emission controls, you realize if you can get a few degrees higher, you can do better with that. So we push up the thermostat temperature of the car now to 205. And I saw somebody saying that maybe 10 years from now, they may be running a 50 PSI pressurized cooling system and running 225 or 240 degree temperature. So as we push that temperature up, we're forcing these thinner lubricants we're using to get more in a danger zone. And quite frankly, there is no excuse for using any petroleum really as a 20-weight oil, especially when you go to 0W20. Your car calls for 0W20. I suggest to you that you use a high-quality synthetic. I would totally recommend to you that you use AMSOIL Signature Series synthetics for 0W20 applications. But if you're not using somebody's synthetic, then you're, as they say, creating automobile malpractice, okay, or auto engine abuse, whatever you want to call it, because you're treating this thing to some hellacious conditions and where it may end up with some damage to the engine. So just don't do it. And you look at companies like Toyota, they recommend synthetics bumper to bumper. They have for the last nearly 10 years. These car manufacturers, no. They were just a little bit hesitant to tell people that's what they needed to use in the past because synthetic wasn't so readily available. But it's readily available today, and you need to make that transition and ask for synthetic. Now, this whole thing about synthetic versus petroleum, there's a magazine article at the lube page that breaks this down in detail. You can read it over 2 or 3 times if you want, and then you can ask me questions right there on the lube page that I guarantee I'll get back to you and answer. But it's detailed out. I wrote it a few years back, and it compares these features and benefits of synthetic versus petroleum. And in this day and market, you got to take care of your car yourself. You have to do the little due diligence. This is where you can actually make a difference in the life of your car, is by taking the time to pay attention and make sure it gets the best quality lubrication to make it last. That's the one thing you can do. You can't change the computer. You can't change the tires. You can't change the body molding, but you can make sure that your engine is properly taken care of, your engine and your transmission, because those components are the life of the car. You blow a transmission today in a car that's 5 years old, in many ways you might as well take it to the junkyard. It costs so much to fix the transmission, it's hardly worth restoring the car. So you can make these things last. I have seen vehicles that have used AMSOIL synthetics that have gone 930,000 miles, okay? And so you can make these vehicles go a long time if you look for good quality lubrication and actually stick with the factory recommended maintenance. I mean, I'm not talking about for the oil drain interval. I'm talking about there's lots of little things like oiling the hinges and checking the rubber and all this kind of stuff. And if you really take what they say you're supposed to do, boy, you can extend the life of these vehicles. They'll go on a long time. And you know what, Bob? You need to extend them. And it's not peanuts to pay $40,000 for a new car.
Yeah, no, that's true. When you do the math and look at the longevity.
Yeah, and, the European people are ahead of us in this. They keep cars down in Europe right at 20 years. We're up to 11, and just a number of years ago, around the turn of the century, we only kept cars 7 years in this country. But now we're up to 11. So people are figuring out, I got to run this thing longer. I got to get my money's worth out of it. I got to really make this, a car that will last and perform and look good. And you do that by taking care of it. And you have to pay attention to what kind of lubricants you put in. And over the lifetime of the vehicle, you will save thousands of dollars by using high-quality lubricants and not going chintzy. Use the old Fram commercial they had years ago, said, pay me now or pay me later. You can take your choice. And that's the same thing with lubricants. Pay for quality lubricants or pay more in the future when you have to fix the vehicle where you've worn it out with cheap lubricants. So that's the best message I got for folks, and I really advise them, go to the Lube page. Check it out. I've written, we're going to be having a number of these shows recorded there. I try to break down what was in the show so they see an outline of that, so they can click on different shows where we talked about different types of things to do with oil and lubrication, and they can listen to some of the things said, hear the melodious tones of Dan and Bob shooting the breeze about oil.
That's right. Dan, why don't you give out the telephone number for the Lube page and yourself?
Yes, the toll-free number is 800-370-2986. Again, that's 800-370-2986. And I always will answer the questions when people call me, and it's very easy to put in a question either at the website or direct by email. You can just remember my name, Dan Watson, at thelubepage.com. And so if you know who I am and you know that the Lube page is my website, you don't even have to go there. You can just type in Dan Watson at thelubepage.com and send me an email. But you can go to the Lube page, and there's a place for you to ask a question. And they can also send an email into you, Bob, and hold the question until we go on the air. So I advise people to take an interest in these things and ask questions. It's free. It doesn't cost you a penny to ask for advice. And nobody's going to call you up from the Lube page and strong-arm you and say, hey, I won't answer your question unless you buy 2 cases of Amsoil right now. We're going to say, hey, I'm this kind of guy. I've told you what's best for your vehicle. We're not the only choice in town, but we'd love to have your business. So the advice is free.
And once again, the hour just flies by. Dan, thank you for entertaining us and giving us all those great little bits of history. And everybody, check out thelubepage.com. Thank you, Dan.
All right, Bob. We'll see you next time.
Take care. That's going to do it for this hour of Auto World.
Two lips touching together.
Folks, this is Bob Long, host of Auto World Radio, with great news. We have a new sponsor, Dan Watson, who distributes Amsoil throughout the USA and Canada. Dan is one of Amsoil's largest distributors. He's a former U.S. Navy nuclear specialist and a certified lubrication specialist with 25-plus years of experience. You can listen to Dan every Sunday evening live at 6 p.m. Eastern Time here on GCNlive.com. Get all of your questions answered and ensure you get the best lubrication for your car, truck, boat, or really anything that moves. In 1972, Amsoil pioneered synthetic lubrication, and Amsoil continues to provide the best lubrication money can buy. Get the best advice for the best results. Contact Dan at thelubepage.com. That's thelubepage.com. Or call 800-370-2986. That's 800-370-2986.